by welcoming everyone to this week's CCL training program. It's a weekly webinar of Citizens Climate Lobbies that provides CCL supporters like you and I with access to in-depth training opportunities on topics related to climate change and effective climate advocacy. I'll be your host tonight. My name is Brett Cease, and we're diving into the second of two lobby trainings heading into our summer 2024 Lobby Day in DC. Tonight, we're going to have the chance to do a little review of what we covered on Monday, and then talk a little bit more about how this fits into the larger legislative landscape. And then, like I've shared, open it up for a larger Q&A discussion. We are lucky to be joined by CCL's Government Affairs team. We have here Ben Pendergrass, CCL's Vice President of Government Affairs, as well as the wonderful Jen Tyler, Senior Director of Government Affairs with CCL, joining us live tonight. And if we've done our job well in the next hour ahead, we hope to focus on reviewing a brief summary of what we're going to DC to talk about with our primary and secondary asks. We hope also that we'll be able to fill in a little bit more of the background and understanding of the dynamics in Congress right now and how that's impacted the strategy behind our summer lobby day. And then we also, as we've hinted at, want to provide you, CCL leaders across the country, ample time to ask questions and engage with our legislative leadership team. So to get all that in 1 hour, what we're going to do is a brief review of primary asks first, secondary asks next, talk a little bit more, again, a reminder of leaders' letters, where to find that, review the congressional landscape, and then that should take us through the first half hour. We'll go into a Q&A discussion after that. And with that, one quick basic reminder on my end, just so that everyone's on the same page. All of the primary and secondary asks now are officially uploaded to CCL Community. If you are looking for them, you can just search for primary and secondary asks. They should be the top hits. They're also available under our resources. They're also under the most recent events. So just know that if you're looking for those, they are available, and I'll put a link, or Mindy can, in just a little bit. We'll also make sure after tonight's training to get this training up as soon as possible tomorrow on our YouTube channel. You can just go to the videos tab and search for cclusa.org/YouTube, type that in, and get right to our YouTube channel. We'll also put this on our CCL community event and training pages so that you have access to this, and know that we do separate the main discussion and the Q&A into two separate videos. You can get a link to the Q&A in the description notes. That way it just keeps it down, and our listenership is more attentive if they're not overwhelmed by a full hour overall. But without further ado, thank you all so much for being here. I will get to the chat where you'll see me the rest of the night, and I'll pass it to you, Ben, to jump into our presentation.
Thanks, Brett. Really appreciate it. Welcome to everybody. It's good to see everyone again. I'm really excited to be back for this second training. And tonight we're going to we do want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. So less on the presentation side, more on the question side, but we do want to take the opportunity to give a little bit more context about like the dynamics of why we structured the way we did, and really dive a little bit into the congressional landscape. It's been a heck of a Congress this time around, as folks following along at home have probably noticed. So we're going to talk a little bit about those things. And one that I would just want to cite right here at the beginning, one of the most exciting things about the June conference, besides all of us getting together, is we're really bringing some excellent people to talk to us, to really focus on some really policy experts that can give us even a deeper dive into some of the things you'll be lobbying on. So we'll do this training, but bear in mind, we're going to have some brilliant folks at the conference that are going to address all of these things we're talking about in breakout sessions in the main session. And then Jen and I will give you the very last update on Sunday right before we go on the lobby day. And I guarantee there will be some changes between now and then, probably. With that, I'll let Jen kick it off to do a very brief review of some of the primary asks.
Perfect. Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. So as you heard in our last call, our two primary asks are the Prove It Act, which you guys are familiar with, S1863, and there's a forthcoming House bill. We don't have a number yet because it hasn't been introduced, but it will be hopefully in the coming weeks. And then permitting reform, which you guys are also familiar with because we have been lobbying on that. So we'll start with the Prove It Act. I'm just going to do a quick top line. And again, there's the previous training in a one-pager now posted on Community where you can get a lot more details. But the Prove It Act is a bill that requires the Department of Energy to study the greenhouse gas emissions intensity of a variety of different products. So there's a list of products in the bill. You'll recognize some of them as being pretty emissions intensive products. So thinking of things like aluminum, cement, crude oil, fertilizer, things like that. There's different products that are listed. And the study in terms of emissions is not just US produced products, but it also includes some other covered countries. So China's included, some of our allies are included. But the bill is requiring DOE to study that and get that emissions data for us. And why prove it? Well, there's a bunch of different reasons. For the actual purpose of the bill, the official data the bill will collect is going to be really important. There's obviously a lot of groups that have studied roughly the emissions intensity of some of these products, but none of it's official data. None of it's been verified. None of it's been required industry-wide. And so we have a really firm count. This would give us that official data that we can really rely on, and we can see how it is across the board in the US, but also in those other covered countries. And the data ultimately is going to be used to promote US industry and make sure that we're holding other countries accountable. So we know, based on a lot of data that's already out there, that we have really clean industry. Getting this data is going to really demonstrate that, prove that our industry is a lot cleaner than some of these other countries like China, and make sure that we're able to use that data to hold some of these other countries accountable for how emissions intense their production is. It also would allow us to use trade as a tool to bring down global emissions. So you can understand that kind of emissions imbalance globally between us and some other countries like China, and how we can use our trade agreements, use other things down the road to address some of those global emissions. Now, beyond what the bill does itself, the whole purpose of part of these asks, right, is not just what the bill itself does, but what it's going to enable us to do down the road. And a bill like this, the Prove It Act, which has a ton of Republican support, is incredibly bipartisan, is really helping us grow the climate coalition. So not only do we have a lot of bipartisan support in Congress, you'll see Republicans have supported it in the House or in the Senate and passed it through committee, but we're also getting a lot of other folks, a lot of industry, and other outside groups to support the bill. So it's growing our climate coalition. It's showing that there is bipartisan support that we can build on for future climate policy. And lastly, as I mentioned, there's going to be a House bill. So there's momentum here. This bill is moved through Senate committee. We're going to have a House bill that's going to be bipartisan, hopefully in the coming weeks or the coming month. And there's a lot of momentum behind this. And so we want to keep that momentum going. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ben to talk a little bit about how do we talk about this? How do we communicate in our meetings about Prove It?
Thanks, Jen. Now, one thing I really want to touch on tonight is different members of Congress are going to support this bill for different reasons, and that's okay. I kind of think of it as an analogy that I'll probably return to tonight. It's like when you are in a relationship and your partner, and there's something you really want, like say like a shiny new EV, and you really want that EV because it lowers emissions, but your partner might be thinking more along the lines of reliability, or they're tired of paying for gas and costs. You might have two different reasons you like that new EV, but if you really want it, what's going to be the most strategic thing to talk about with your partner? The emissions reductions you care about, or the savings in gas costs that they care about? You're going to talk about the savings in gas costs. And so I think this is the way you have to look at it when it comes to the Prove It Act. It's not going to be exciting to every member of Congress for the same reason it might be exciting to you, which is thinking down the road with those future emissions reductions we can get as we continue to build out greater and greater climate policies. They might really want it for some other reason, and that's fine. And let's lead with that and really think about that when you're going into meetings. Like, what would your particular member of Congress be most interested in around Prove It? Is it going to be holding China accountable? Is it going to be American competitiveness? Those are the things you need to ask yourself. And one of the reasons we think so carefully about how we talk about Prove It is we do coordinate with the lead sponsors of the bills, and they have experience talking to their colleagues and what messages are working the best and what things have been, not greatly received. And so that's why we're careful about not saying, linking this to further policies like a carbon border tariff or even a carbon price right off the bat. We really want to focus on what the bill actually does, especially in conversations with Republican lawmakers, not speculate on what it could lead to, but focus just on what the bill itself does, one of the things we've really seen is the bill gets attacked in ways that are really not, they misconstrue what the bill does. They attack it, saying it's going to impose various regimes on American businesses in the future. We don't want to do anything to reinforce the opposition. We want to do things that counter it. And so those are some things to just really keep in mind when we're messaging the bill, and we are very careful about it. And now we'll go ahead and move on to permitting reform.
All right. Well, you guys are probably familiar with this next slide. Permitting reform is our second primary ask, and we've been advocating primarily for two things when we advocate for permitting reform now for quite some time. Our top line priorities and the things we're going back to this June is that permitting reform drives down carbon pollution by speeding up the approval of clean energy projects. And second, it protects the health and safety of the American people and communities. So we're thinking community engagement, that sort of thing, making sure that we're balancing those two priorities. One, we want to speed things up. We want to get clean energy connected, but we don't want to do it at the expense of local communities and making sure that people still have a say. So those are our two top line points. And Ben, do you want to talk a little bit about the messaging for that?
Yeah, one thing, as I said, things change. Things have changed between Monday and today. And this is one reason why we have structured the permitting ask the way we have, because we have gotten some questions like, why aren't we just focused on big wires, or why aren't we leaning into more specific things in permitting? Well, what I talked about on Monday is we just had a big FERC rulemaking, and right after that happened, Senator Schumer came out and said, I think we've done enough on transmission. FERC did this. There's this new rule. We don't necessarily need permitting reform. And one of the things that has become really clear since the FERC rule was introduced that we talked about on Monday is that's not true. There's still a big need on permitting, and it has to be congressional action. And we really want to deliver that message that that is the case. What has also happened between, what the primary thing that happened between our Monday session here with you guys and today is the Senate held a hearing on transmission and the grid and the energy needs in the future. And one of the things that came out of that hearing was Senator Manchin announced that he hopes to have text, maybe as soon as this week, they've been working on for a long time, on a bipartisan permitting bill. Now, we've known this bill was coming and in the works for some time, and have been in conversations about it, but it has been very under the radar, behind closed doors, and we couldn't really say there could be a bill coming, because Senator Manchin himself had not been publicly stating that. Well, now he has. And so now between today and the June lobby day, there could be a bipartisan comprehensive bill out there. And that's also one of the reasons why we were talking big line permitting package, is that a lot of the things that are some of the smaller bills that we've talked about that people have been interested in, geothermal, hydropower, some of those things, big wires included, could all be wrapped up into this package. But we won't know until the text is officially released. Jen, why don't you go through, just to remind people, some of the things that have gotten done and some of the things we think still need to be done in this package.
Yeah, definitely. So this slide is going to help you visualize exactly what Ben's talking about, why we need to reiterate to people, we've gotten a lot done, but there's still a lot more to get done. So we've been advocating to make sure that transmission can be permitted and built faster. That was done partially it wasn't done. There's still more to be done there, and you can see it in other items, the interregional planning and transmission. There's still some leftover items there on transmission that have to be done in order for us to get power from one area of the country to another. Reducing the time it takes to complete environmental reviews, yes, the rules that were put out there definitely address that. Avoiding duplicative processes, designating the lead agency, those also were included, and that was part of the debt ceiling deal that was done last year. And ensuring robust and early community engagement. I think it's such a critical piece of this, and that was definitely protected and expanded in these rules that were put forward. But so that still leaves judicial review, making sure that these projects, yes, can be challenged and bad projects can be stopped, but they're not able to be challenged indefinitely and on hold for years and years in the court system. As I mentioned, we still need to get more done on interregional planning and transmission for these longer transmission lines. Minimum transfer requirements, things like the Big Wires Act you guys have lobbied on, is still not done. And technology-specific permitting reforms, so things around nuclear, hydropower, geothermal, those sorts of specific permitting reforms have not been done. So there's still a good chunk out there that needs to get done in order for us to see those ultimate emissions reductions that we need to see through permitting reform. And I'll let you, Ben, go over a little bit more of the broader messaging and why we went back to this broader messaging now.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So going back, like, I mean, a lot of it had to do with this post-FERC environment. I think one of our newest board members, Neil Chatterjee, who was actually the chairman of FERC a couple of years ago, very eloquently today on a webinar was talking about the fact that he thinks the FERC rule is great. He would have voted for it if he was still on the commission, but he very clearly, more eloquently than I ever could, articulated the need that it's not the end all be all, that it's not a silver bullet, that Congress still needs to take action. FERC did what they can, but now it's time for Congress to step up. Another reason I think it's really important to have a focus on Congress here is that rules are not necessarily as durable as congressional action. I think you've heard this message for a long time. We said it around the original Clean Power Plan, that rules can be struck down by an incoming administration. They're just not as durable as legislation. So if we're going to get really good, solid permitting reform, it needs to be done through the congressional process. And just once again, to revisit why we were going with that really broad message, is we knew the Senate bill was potentially coming, but the timing of the bill is never, timing of any bill, it seems like recently in June, is never really perfectly aligned with when we're doing trainings and things like that. So we had to make sure to leave a broad message. I have to also reiterate that this bill that could be coming, it might not actually get introduced. That's a caveat. Things change. You guys remember the song and dance we had with the IRA, where it was moving, then it wasn't moving, and then it was moving, and then it was law. There could be some of that going on here. And two, we do have to vet the bill, see the entirety of the bill. It might not be, I think there's going to be a lot of good stuff in there, but we still have to take a look at the bill. We can't just say we're going to support something sight unseen, but we know broadly the contours of it, and there's going to be a lot of good stuff in there for transmission, and that's going to be one of the key factors in lowering emissions. All right, Jen, do you just want to do a brief review on the secondary asks?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got 2 secondary asks this June, and part of the reason we've only got a couple is that we do expect the bulk of your meetings to be taken up by those 2 primary asks, prove it and permitting reform. But we included 2 secondary asks that have a lot of momentum and we think really stand a shot at moving. And we just need to build more support for these 2 bills to get them across the finish line. So the first one, which we've been lobbying on, is the Increased Technical Service Provider Access Act, so TSPs, Technical Service Providers. And that's a bill that basically is allowing the federal government to have more TSPs, Technical Service Providers, which are individuals who help farmers, ranchers, foresters access conservation programs. So these TSPs help these farmers, foresters, and ranchers access these conservation dollars to do conservation practices on their farms, on their ranches. So a really critical piece to getting them to implement climate smart and other important conservation practices. That bill is a bill that we are hoping will be included in the Farm Bill. It has been included in the House introduced Farm Bill language, and we're hoping that the Senate would also consider it and ultimately it would move forward. We've built a lot of support, but we need to build a little bit more for that bill. The second ask is the Seedlings for Sustainable Habitat Restoration Act. That's also something we lobbied on, and we did see it move out of committee about a month ago in the House. So we saw some movement in part because of the support we've built for the bill and the information around the bill. But that bill is a small caveat to the infrastructure bill that was passed a few years ago, making sure that these infrastructure dollars can go towards seedlings, nurseries that are producing seedlings. It's a big piece of reforestation, dealing with the wildfire issue we have. So that bill, we've seen some momentum. It's another Farm Bill play as well, that we're hoping it would be included in the Farm Bill. And as I said, we're focusing on these 2 because we think there is momentum behind them, and they are pretty timely asks. So those are our 2 secondary asks. The last thing I'll cover is the letter from a trusted messenger. You guys have been working, a lot of you have been working on getting letters from a trusted messenger in your district, calling for climate action or specific climate policy. And we want to make sure you guys are sharing those letters in your meeting. And that's not only going to show that, you know, you've heard from the specific trusted messenger that your member of Congress might resonate with, but it also demonstrates you guys have these connections in your district. You're doing the outreach. So it's a really important piece of this meeting. The message overall is that we're not alone in calling for action on climate. CCL is not just the folks in that room during your lobby meeting. We are, you know, a grassroots community organization, and we're doing this outreach. There's a lot more constituents and voters who feel the same way we do. We're trying to elevate those voices and make sure they're heard. So we want to make sure you're bringing up that letter when it seems most appropriate. You'll know what's best, but if your letter pertains to a specific policy that we are addressing in our asks, so if your letter is calling for permitting reform action, you should fold it into the permitting reform ask. If it's talking about something related to the Farm Bill or forestry conservation, maybe you include it during the secondary ask portion. If you have a general climate action message, just we need to take action on climate, that might be a good way to start the meeting off, to kind of frame things and show that there's support to get things done. And lastly, if you do have a letter on carbon pricing, that might be a good thing to kind of close the meeting out with and use that at the end. But just think through, when does it seem most relevant in the meeting? But definitely want to make sure you guys don't leave that out and don't forget to mention that, because I think that'll be really critical. And lastly, I want to mention, even though these are about one specific letter from a trusted messenger, I know many of you have been tabling over, you know, Earth Day and a bunch of different community events, and you're always welcome and encouraged to bring letters to the DC office. So if you've got a stack of constituent letters or support, by all means, feel free to bring that in. It can be helpful to let the DC office know that we're not asking for an individual response to each of those forms. But by all means, if you have those, that can be another thing that can be helpful to conclude the meeting with. And with that, Ben, you want to go over the congressional landscape and what's going on in Congress?
Yeah, and this is where we'll get even more casual, and Jen and I might just chat about this stuff a little bit, or maybe not. I don't even know anymore. But needless to say, this has been a historic Congress. It has been, in some ways, one of the most divided and dysfunctional Congresses in history. There's just no getting around that. I mean, their legislative track record up until the last couple of weeks has been pretty poor, and it's been unprecedented. I mean, we haven't had a speaker removed by a vote on the House floor, and in almost in anybody's lifetime, honestly. I mean, I think the last time was what, the 1860s or something, Jen, or 1880s.
Yeah.
And so that really, that's what the landscape is. I mean, you guys have seen it, and I mean, that clearly makes it harder to move things. But we've also had some bipartisan action. Recently, you know, some big bipartisan wins on foreign assistance bills that were able to get a lot of support from both sides of the aisle. They were able to get the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization done in a very bipartisan manner. We've had two giant, big bipartisan votes on nuclear bills, where so you've seen even some of that bipartisanship around clean energy. And so there is still a opportunity to get some of these bipartisan wins and move things. Like, for instance, we really do think the Prove It Act could be folded into one of these must-pass vehicles. I don't know, Jen, do you want to kind of just go through some of the vehicles that could still be moving this Congress, and just give us an overview there real quick?
Yeah. Well, as you guys remember, one of the last bipartisan victories we had just a few weeks ago was funding the government. Took them long enough, but they did it. Well, we've got another round of that coming up in September. So it feels like every day we have to fund the government, but that's coming up. It's got to get done. The National Defense Authorization Act, the big bill that funds all of DoD basically, has to get passed. The Farm Bill, either we need a brand new Farm Bill or some form of short-term reauthorization. And then an end of year omnibus, where a lot of times they pass this large bill at the end of the year in the lame duck to throw in a lot of priorities. So there's still going to be some moving vehicles that have to get done. And there's good opportunity there for some of these climate priorities to be included in those. And I'll also mention, in terms of thinking through what is your member of Congress thinking of, they're definitely thinking about all these things that still need to get done. There's obviously this partisanship undertone that's going on, that you can kind of figure out where your member lies on a certain spectrum. But it's also an election year. So there's a really, kind of limited window to get a lot of these things done. Right now, if your member is in a competitive seat, they might be facing a primary right now, or just faced a primary, and that might be more top of mind. But generally, right now, between now and the August recess, the beginning of August, is the time when there's a flurry of legislative activity. That's part of why this June lobby day is timed so critically, and our asks are so important right now. Once Congress goes into that August recess, that kind of kicks off the real campaign heavy season of the year for members of Congress. At that point, everyone who's facing an election, the entire House and a third of the Senate, is completely consumed for the most part by their campaign and the upcoming election. So we've got these few months here left to get things done, and members of Congress feel the same way. They want to get these wins across the finish line so that they can take pride in it and really share the accomplishments in their upcoming election. So just keep in mind that timeline and where your members' heads might be with the election.
And, we'll just thanks for that, Jen. We'll take a look at, I think it'd be good to revisit our policy roadmap that we started the year with. We can see we're almost halfway through the year, and we've largely stayed on the road. I mean, we're not in the bar ditch that I can see. Now, mind you, some days it really feels like somebody has driven the tractor into the bar ditch on the farm bill, but that's not our fault. But we're moving things forward in a way. We are advancing. We knew what things would look like, and we've been plugging along and hitting different benchmarks as we go along. Now, I'm mindful of my promise to get to 30 minutes of Q&A, but I want to do one last slide, thinking ahead for next Congress and what we'll be doing on a carbon price. All right, so I'm going to return to my my analogy a little bit of the EU of an EV that you have your eye on, and you're in a relationship, and when you want something like that, and your partner's in a bad mood or is worried about money issues or something, maybe that's not the best time to bring up the desire for that shiny new EV. And that's kind of where we are right now. Timing matters for a lot of asks. Like with the election, with everything that's gone on this Congress, dysfunction, the timing for carbon price ask is just not the best. We want to make sure we ask in a way that furthers our goals instead of sets us back. However, the tax debate next Congress is going to be the next big opportunity for a carbon price. We've been thinking about it for some time. We've been gearing up. We've been getting our carbon pricing coalition up here in DC back together to start having these discussions to how we can all, not just CCL, but all the organizations and businesses that support a carbon price, how we can all get prepared and coordinate to start making the case for a carbon price in the next Congress. And so be mindful, while we're not asking for it right now because of timing and some of these things that we know we need to push forward on right this moment, we're thinking about it. And after the Congress, you'll start to see some more educational opportunities around carbon pricing and the tax debate and what that could look like. And post-election, I think we're really going to be pushing to hopefully get a permitting bill over the finish line and set up a carbon price for the next Congress and have that conversation around tax reform that we know is going to kick off in 2025. So be ready, it's coming. And one thing I think I know we're going to turn over questions, but I want to belabor this point. One of the things that I think is so important in the permitting reform conversation is that I think it is really key to the success of a carbon price down the road. Every piece of fossil fuel infrastructure we take offline, the carbon price has to be replaced by something. We have to build stuff. It just can't be taken offline and go away. The Senate hearing on Tuesday really drove that home, that every legacy fossil fuel piece of generation needs to be replaced by something, and we have to be able to build that faster. Otherwise, in the instance of a carbon price, we could end up in a situation where the prices of things just go up. And because of permitting slowing things down because of endless litigation that takes 10 years to be transmission. We can't get that new, even though there's that strong economic incentive to build things, those barriers would prevent them from being built. So we really need both. And so right now is our opportunity to do the permitting reform piece first, which I think will in the end make a future carbon price even that much more successful. And I think that's something we really got to keep in front of us when we think about we are doing things in a smart, strategic manner that at the end is going to be best for the climate and best to get things done.
All right, good work. No, that was incredibly helpful context. And I think that all of us have been looking forward to that legislative overview and kind of the congressional landscape that you laid out at the end. So with that, though, I've already put a link to this in the chat as well. cclusa.org/forums is your best go-to for any ongoing questions. Your regional directors are also amazing resources. I saw a lot of questions tonight that were specific to, oh, what should I do about this specific scenario with my lobby meeting? You can go to them. You can go to the liaison coordinating team that both Mindy and Jen do a wonderful job of heading up. But with that, we hope that you found tonight's training empowering and motivating. And I am going to unmute all lines just so that we can hear each other as we sign off tonight. It's so good to see all of you. And thank you all so much again for being here. Stay safe, and we'll see you in DC shortly.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
See you soon.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration.
Like what you hear? Recommend us to your friends and make sure to give us a 5-star rating. It helps us show up on other listeners' feeds. Feel free to pass on any suggestions for future episodes in the comments as well.
And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.